O heavenly King, comfort of the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fill us to all things. Treasure blessings and give our life, come and abide in us and cleanse us from every impurity. Save our souls, O good one. Amen. Oh, what did you do to your arm?
This? Punching bag.
Nice. Thought maybe one of the dogs got you or something.
Yeah, that's what everybody's been asking me. Did one of the dogs bite me?
I think I've probably seen him now. I have an image in my head.
Sorry.
I think we have.
So we're studying the ladder, and we're step 23, and basically we'll read it through and comment it.
I'd like to read.
Okay.
I can do the next one.
Do you want to read? You can read if you want to.
Yeah, I can read. I don't mind.
It's not if you mind or not.
You can read just.
We're going to have sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. Step 23. On mad pride, and in the same step, on unclean, blasphemous thoughts. Pride is a denial of God, an invention of the devil, the despising of men, the mother of condemnation, the offspring of praise, a sign of sterility, flight from divine assistance, the precursor of madness, the cause of falls, a foothold for satanic possession, a source of anger, a door of hypocrisy, the support of demons, the guardian of sins, the patron of pitilessness, the rejection of compassion, a bitter inquisitor, an inhuman judge, an opponent of God, a root of blasphemy. The consummation of vainglory is the beginning of pride. The middle is the humiliation of our neighbor, the shameless parade of our labors, self-praise in the heart, hatred of exposure, and the end is denial of God's help, the extolling of one's own exertions, fiendish character. Let all of us who wish to avoid this pit listen. This passion often finds food in gratitude, for at first it does not shamelessly advise us to deny God. I have seen people who thank God with their mouth but mentally magnify themselves. And this is confirmed by that Pharisee who said ironically, "O God, I thank thee." Where a fall has overtaken us, there pride has already pitched its tent, because a fall is an indication of pride. A venerable man said to me, "Suppose that there are 12 shameful passions. If we deliberately love one of them, I mean pride, it will fill the place of the remaining 11. A haughty monk contradicts violently, but a humble one cannot even look another in the face. The cypress does not bend to walk on earth, nor does a lofty-hearted monk bend to acquire obedience. An arrogant man yearns after authority, for otherwise, as it were, he cannot, or rather does not wish to perish utterly. God resisteth the proud. Who then can have mercy on them? Every proud-hearted man is unclean before God. Who then can cleanse such a person? Chastisement for the proud is a fall, a thorn is a devil, and abandonment by God is madness. In the first two cases, people have often been healed by men, but the last is humanly incurable. He who refuses reproof shows his passion, but he who accepts it is free of this fetter. An angel fell from heaven without any other passion except pride. And so we ask whether it is possible to ascend to heaven by humility alone, without any of the other virtues. Pride is loss of wealth and sweat. They cried, but there was none to save, no doubt because they cried with pride. They cried to the Lord, and you heard them not, no doubt because they were not trying to cut out the faults against which they prayed. A most learned elder spiritually admonished a proud brother, but he in his blindness said, "Forgive me, Father, I am not proud." The wise elder said to him, "What clearer proof of this passion could you have given us, son, than to say, 'I am not proud'?" Such people have been helped by submission, a more rigorous and humiliating life, and the reading of the supernatural feats of the fathers. Perhaps even then there will be little hope of salvation for those suffering from this malady. It is shameful to be proud of the adornments that are not your own, but utter madness to fancy one deserves God's gifts. Be exalted only by such achievements as you had before your birth. But what you received after your birth, as also birth itself, God gave you. Only those virtues which you have obtained without the cooperation of the mind belong to you, because your mind was given you by God. Only such victories as you won without the cooperation of the body have been accomplished by your efforts, because the body is not yours, but a work of God. Do not be self-confident until you hear the final sentence passed upon yourself, bearing in mind that the guest who got as far as joining in the marriage feast, and then was bound hand and foot and cast out into the outer darkness. Do not lift up your neck, creature of earth, for many, though holy and spiritual, were cast from heaven. When the demon of pride gets a foothold in his servants, he appears to them either in sleep or in a waking vision, as though in the form of a holy angel or some martyr, and gives them a revelation of mysteries or a free bestowal of spiritual gifts, so that these unfortunates may be deceived and completely lose their wits. Even if we endure 10,000 deaths for Christ, even so we shall not repay all that is due. For the blood of God and the blood of his servants are quite different, and here I mean the dignity and not the actual physical substance. We should constantly be examining and comparing ourselves with the Holy Fathers and the lights who lived before us, and we should then find that we have not yet entered upon the path of the ascetic life, and have not kept our vow in holy fashion, and in disposition are still living in the world. A monk, properly speaking, is he whose soul's eye does not look haughtily, and whose bodily feeling is unmoved. A monk is he who calls his enemies to combat like wild beasts, and provokes them as they flee from him. A monk experiences unceasing rapture of mind and sorrow of life. A monk is one who is conditioned by virtues as others are by pleasures. A monk possesses unfailing light in the eye of the heart. A monk has an abyss of humility into which he has plunged and suffocated every evil spirit. Forgetfulness of our falls is the result of conceit, for the remembrance of them leads to humility. Pride is utter penury of soul, under the illusion of wealth, imagining light in its darkness. The foul passion not only blocks our advance, but even hurls us down from the heights. The proud man is a pomegranate, rotten inside, while outwardly radiant with beauty. A proud monk has no need of a devil. He has become a devil and enemy to himself. Darkness is foreign to light, and a proud person is foreign to every virtue. In the hearts of the proud, blasphemous words will find birth, but in the souls of the humble, heavenly visions. A thief abominates the sun, a proud man scorns the meek. I do not know how it is, but the majority of the proud remain ignorant of their real selves. They imagine that they are free from passion, and they only realize their need, lack, and poverty at their departure from this life. The man enmeshed in pride should make supplication unto the Lord, for vain is the salvation of man for him. I once caught this mad impostor as it was rising in my heart, bearing on its shoulders its mother vainglory, roping them with the noose of obedience and thrashing them with the whip of humility, I demanded how they got access to me. At last, when flogged, they said, "We have neither beginning nor birth, for we are progenitors and parents of all the passions. Contrition of heart that is born of obedience is our real enemy. We cannot bear to be subject to anyone. That is why we fell from heaven, though we had authority there. In brief, we are the parents of all that opposes humility, for everything which furthers humility opposes us. We hold sway everywhere, save in heaven, so where will you run from our presence? We often accompany dishonors and obedience, and freedom from anger, and lack of resentment and service. Our offspring are the falls of spiritual men: anger, calumny, spite, irritability, shouting, blasphemy, hypocrisy, hatred, envy, disputation, self-will, and disobedience. There is only one thing in which we have no power to meddle, and we shall tell you this, for we cannot bear your blows. If you keep up a sincere condemnation of yourself before the Lord, you can count us as weak as a cobweb. For pride's saddle horse, as you see, is vainglory, on which I am mounted. But holy humility and self-accusation laugh at both the horse and its rider, happily singing the song of victory. Let us sing to the Lord, for gloriously is he glorified. Horse and rider hath he hurled into the sea and into the abyss of humility. This is the 23rd step. He who mounts it, if any can mount it, will be strong.
So do you have any questions?
Yeah, what does it mean by the hardy monk?
Where?
Line 6 from the beginning.
Chapter 6?
No, step 23, line 6 says the hardy monk contradicts.
Haughty monk.
Yep.
Haughty means proud, conceited.
Okay.
Contradicts violently. In other words, he argues against those who have authority over him and give obedience, like a teenager.
So he's like sure that he can do it himself. Okay.
I can do it. I know better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got it.
Yes.
A haughty monk contradicts violently.
Uh-huh. Means he just doesn't just kind of blow off the person that's giving him the obedience or telling him something. That he contradicts him. He's, that doesn't mean that he necessarily hits him.
Yeah.
But but I don't know. Maybe he cusses him out or something like that.
Is this just? I mean, I know it's written. Narrative is written as if it was being addressed to a monk, but I assume all this applies to lay people as well.
Sure, pride. Yeah, absolutely. It's this is written in a monastic context of obedience, and it's and in order to be obedient, you have to lay aside your self-opinion and your conceit and your idea of how things should be done, and simply do and accept what you're told, and don't contradict it, and don't grumble, and don't write, and don't and so forth. But it's the same. It's the same anywhere. If you have an employee and the boss tells him to, I want you to please go do this. If you would please, and the employee says, no, I don't want to do it, and I don't want to do it like that because that's wrong, because I know better. So what kind of reaction do you think you're going to get from the boss?
You'll get fired.
You get fired
You're talking about kid.
Yeah, and that's an arrogant, conceited, haughty monk or person.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Actually, this is a line which I was confused about. A monk is he who calls his enemies to combat like wild beasts and provokes them as they flee from him.
what?
So it's line 23. A monk is he who calls his enemies to combat like wild beasts and provokes them as they flee from him.
In other words, who are the monk's enemies?
Demons.
The demons and the passions, right?
Yeah.
And so, so he.
Does he call them? Why would he call them to combat?
Because the devil's going to make him probably call him, right?
Well, he calls them to combat. In other words, he says, "Okay, come and get me."
It means he's giving himself up.
Oh,
yeah.
so that's a proud monk. Is that what that is?
Well, no, I mean, a true monk. He says, "Okay, come and get me," and he taunts his enemies. But he'll fight against them with the weapons of humility and of you know.
It all sounds like he's proud, so he's calling his
Humility,
enemies.
having the prayer to you for him too.
Well, that. It's a little ambiguous.
Yeah.
Isn't the word humility being used in the prayer of Senior Frame of Syrian?
23.
Because they say that in the prayer too, right? Senior Frame, humility?
Yeah.
So I was thinking too.
I have a question. So, number 10. The chastisement for the proud is a fall, a thorn is a devil, and abandonment by God is madness. In the first two cases, people have often been healed by men, but the last is humanly incurable. Could you explain that passage?
Chastisement for the proud is a fall. In other words, for a proud man, if he's chastised, it's like a fall. It's like falling into sin because it hurts his ego. A thorn is a devil. Mm-hmm. In other words, just if chastisement is like a fall, then a thorn, like some kind of something that really gets you and really bothers you, is like a devil.
Okay.
Some of these are a little enigmatic.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just going along with what Nick was saying about 23 and into 35 it talks about, I don't know how it is, but the proud for the most part remain ignorant of their real selves. And I think that's running from who we really are, reality, living in our imagination. And so it kind of ties in with that, calls his enemies to combat. We quit running and face the demons that we have, and the fear we have, and ourselves, instead of running.
Well, pride is all about the ego. And it's living in the ego instead of living in our true selves. And it's building up and projecting our ego and thinking that that's our reality. And it's
Playing
not.
God.
Yeah.
Judging, playing God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we create an ideal image of ourselves for our ego, and so we're in denial that we have that we suffer from the passions. We're in denial and we think we have control of ourselves, and we think that we're more that we're spiritual, and that we're advanced, and that we're mature, and all of these things. And in reality, it's It's just fraud. But what's really scary about this is that, you know, if this is the way we've lived, we only realize that all of that was a fraud when we're approaching death.
Mm-hmm.
This is 21 is very valuable. We should be constantly examining and comparing ourselves with the Holy Fathers and the lights who lived before us, and we should then find that we have not yet entered upon the path of ascetic life, and have not kept our vow in holy fashion, and in disposition are still living in the world. In other words, if we compare ourselves with the great saints of old, we haven't even begun on the spiritual life. Mm-hmm. And so it just exposes all of our proud and vainglorious hypocrisy.
But if we don't?
If we don't what?
Compare.
If we don't compare ourselves, then very often we're lost in our own self-delusion.
There's no exit, nowhere.
Nope.
It's always,
there's always something that's...
So anything else in this? $38.
Concerning unmentionable blasphemous thoughts. We have heard that from a troublesome root and mother comes a most troublesome offspring. That is to say, unspeakable blasphemy is born from foul pride. So it is necessary to bring it into the open, for it is no ordinary creature, but the most cruel of all our foes and enemies. And what is still worse, it is difficult to put into words, to confess, or to expose these thoughts to a spiritual physician. And so this unholy disease has produced frustration and despair in many, destroying all their hope like a worm in a tree. During the divine services, and the very moment when the mysteries are being accomplished, this vile enemy often blasphemes the Lord and the holy sacrifice that is being consecrated. Wherefore we clearly learn that it is not our soul that produces these unspeakable, godless, and unthinkable words within us, but the God-hating fiend who fled from heaven for uttering blasphemies against the Lord thereto, as it would seem. For if these shameless and disgraceful words are my own, how could I worship after receiving the gift? How can I praise and revile at one and the same time? This deceiver and corrupter of souls has often driven many out of their mind. No other thought is so difficult to tell in confession as this. That is why it often remains with many to the very end of their lives. For nothing gives the demons and bad thoughts such power over us as nourishing and hiding them in our heart unconfessed. No one in the face of blasphemous thoughts need think that the guilt lies within him, for the Lord is the knower of hearts, and he is aware that such words and thoughts do not come from us, but from our foes. Drunkenness is a cause of stumbling, and pride is a cause of unseemly thoughts. As far as his stumbling is concerned, the drunkard is not to blame, but he will certainly be punished for his drunkenness. When we stand in prayer, those unclean and unspeakable thoughts assail us, but if we continue praying to the end, they retire at once, for they do not fight those who stand up to them. The godless foe not only blasphemes God and everything divine, but utters the most shameful and indecent words within our minds to make us either give up praying or else despair of ourselves. He has prevented many from praying and separated many from the holy mysteries. This evil and inhuman tyrant has wearied the bodies of some with grief, has exhausted others with fasting, and has given them no rest. He does this with those living in the monastic life as well as with people living in the world, suggesting to them that there is no hope whatsoever of salvation for them, and assuring them that they are more to be pitied and more wretched than all the unbelievers and heathen. He who is troubled by the spirit of blasphemy and wants to be delivered from it should know for certain that it is not his soul that is the cause of such thoughts, but the impure demon who once said to the Lord, "As these things which I give thee, all these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me." And so let us humiliate him, and without paying the least regard to his suggestions, say to him, Get thee behind me, Satan. I shall worship the Lord my God, and him only will I serve. Thy toil and thy word shall return upon thine own head, and thy blasphemy will come down upon thine own pate, in the present and in the age to come. Amen. He who wants to grapple with the demon of blasphemy in any other way is like a man trying to hold lightning in his hands. For how will you catch or contend and grapple with one who bursts into the heart suddenly like the wind, utters words quicker than a flash, and immediately vanishes? All other enemies stop, wrestle, linger, and give time to those who wish to struggle with them. But not this one. He has scarcely appeared, and he is gone. He has hardly said a word, and he is away. This demon often likes to haunt the minds of simple and innocent people, and they are more upset and bewildered by it than others. We can say certainly of them that all this happens to them, not from self-esteem, but from the enemy of the demons. We ought to stop judging and condemning our neighbor, and then we shall not fear blasphemous thoughts, for the former is the occasion and root of the latter. As one who is shut up in his house hears the words of passers-by, without joining in their conversation, so the soul, keeping to itself and overhearing the diabolical blasphemies, is troubled by what is said by the demon passing by. He who despises him is delivered from this affliction, but he who contrives some other way to wage war with it will end by submitting to it. He who wishes to conquer the spirits with words is like one trying to lock up the winds. One zealous monk who was troubled by this demon wore out his flesh for 20 years by fasts and vigils. But as he felt no benefit, he wrote his temptation on a tablet and went to a certain holy man and gave him the tablet and bowed his face to the earth, not daring to look up. As soon as the elder had read it, he smiled, and raising the brother, he said to him, "Lay your hand on my neck, son." And when the brother had done that, the great man said, "On my neck, brother, be this sin, for as many years as it has acted or shall act in you. Only after this ignore it." And the monk assured me that even before he had left the elder's cell, his infirmity had gone. The man who had been tempted in this way told me this himself, offering thanksgiving to God. He who has won the victory over this infirmity has banished pride.
So, just questions. I don't think this is a uniquely monastic thing. Sometimes some of the most obnoxious thoughts come in the middle of the services or middle of prayer or something like that. Yeah.
Number 49 says, "We ought to stop judging and condemning our brother, and then we shall not fear blasphemous thoughts, for the former is the occasion and root of the latter."
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain the process of how that is?
Well, if we judge and condemn our brother, we cut ourselves off from grace, and so that gives a free hand to the evil one in our mind. Judgment, gossip, condemnation, all of that stuff, that is really deadly. It's a mortal sin, and it has real consequences to it. Yeah,
It's kind of like that. It's playing God.
yeah.
Putting yourself in the place of God.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the ego seems to do.
Yep.
Going back to his thought about condemning your brother, I remember in the prayer I've seen your friend says, "Don't let me condemn my brother for judge others." Is that the same kind of meaning?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea is to stop the judgmental thoughts going on in our minds.
Mm-hmm.
And how easy it is, all this nonsense we get involved with politics, and it's all judgment and condemnation.
But what's the best way to fight judgment and condemning somebody? Like, just don't think about it, or
Don't think about it.
okay.
Let it go.
Okay.
Don't indulge it.
Yeah. Sometimes I had that, like, if someone gets me mad, I just want to, like, just condemn him for doing that, or say to him, you know what, he did this, but I'm like, should I say that? Because that might go against me. So I'm like, am I doing something right or something wrong,
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. If you're judging, criticizing, and condemning somebody, you're wrong.
Understood.
And it's hard, especially, if somebody's really in your face
Oh, yeah.
with their stuff. So, but in order to stop the thoughts,
Just walk away.
Get a handle on that is don't allow those kinds of thoughts to get in our mind. It's also a wonderful exercise in watchfulness over ourselves. If we can cut out judgmental and condemnatory thoughts, we can also cut out blasphemous thoughts. And the thoughts are not just it's not just words, it's not just ideas, it's images, it's feelings, it's emotions, it's all of that stuff. Memories.
Mm-hmm.
So, Radhika, we should. I'm trying to understand what you said about judging. We should not defend ourselves. Or under what circumstances is it correct to defend yourself, either verbally or even physically, or a monk should not defend himself? Or?
I didn't say you shouldn't defend yourself.
Okay.
I said you shouldn't judge and condemn somebody.
Okay.
And especially in terms of gossip and slander. You can defend yourself just as long as you
Stay in peace.
You keep it.
Dispassionate.
Just thinking about that, the danger that I see in myself is making excuses and defending what I do and cover it up and stay in my fallenness. My excuse making, that it's so habitual.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's okay.
What's your
Discerning. Discerning.
what?
Discerning.
That's what I was going to say.
So nobody else has anything on this chapter?
Just the last, if you can kind of comment on number 52.
It's the same thing as this.
Well, the monk felt very embarrassed, that he had these blasphemous thoughts, and he struggled against it by his own activity, and he couldn't conquer it, and so finally, later than he should have, went and confessed it, and so it was a symbolic action that the elder said, "Well, lay it on my neck."
Yeah. Is this because, like you said, it should come earlier? Is it because he didn't confess it? It was an unconfessed sin.
Well, it was an unconfessed sin. He probably because he was embarrassed about it, and he thought he could struggle against it himself. So there's pride. That's the upshot of it. Anything else? Okay, step 24.
On meekness, simplicity, and guilelessness, which come not from nature but from conscious effort, and about guile. The morning light precedes the sun, and the precursor of all humility is meekness. Therefore, let us hear in what order the light arranges these virtues. For he says, "Learn of me, for I am meek and humble in heart." So then, before looking at the sun, we must be illumined by the light, and then we can look with a clear gaze at the sun. For it is impossible, absolutely impossible, to gaze upon the sun before we have experienced that light, as the true order of the aforementioned virtues teaches us. Meekness is an unchangeable state of mind, which remains the same in honor and dishonor. Meekness consists in praying calmly and sincerely for a neighbor when he causes many turmoils. Meekness is a rock overlooking the sea of anger, which breaks all the waves that dash against it, yet remains completely unmoved. Meekness is the buttress of patience, the door, or rather the mother of love, and the foundation of discernment. For it is said, "The Lord will teach the meek his ways." It prepares us for the forgiveness of sins. It is boldness in prayer, an abode of the Holy Spirit. But to whom shall I look? Even to him that is meek and quiet. Meekness is the fellow worker of obedience, the guide of the brotherhood, a bridle for the enraged, a check to the irritable, a minister of joy, the imitation of Christ, something proper to angels, shackles for demons, a shield against bitterness. In the hearts of the meek the Lord finds rest, but a turbulent soul is a seat of the devil. The meek shall inherit the earth, or rather shall exercise dominion over it, but bad-tempered men will be harried out of their land. A meek soul is a throne of simplicity, but an angry mind is a creator of evil. A gentle soul retains words of wisdom, for the Lord will guide the meek in judgment, or rather in discretion. An upright soul is a fellow lodger with humility, but an evil one is a daughter of pride. The souls of the meek are filled with knowledge, but an angry mind is a denizen of darkness and ignorance. An angry man and a sarcastic man met one another, and it was impossible to find a true word in their conversation. Unveiling the heart of the former, you find frenzy. Looking into the soul of the other, you see knavery. Simplicity is a constant habit of soul that has become immune to crafty thinking. Guile is a science, or rather a diabolical deformity, bereft of truth and thinking it can escape the notice of many. Hypocrisy is a contrary state of body and soul interwoven with every kind of subterfuge. Guilelessness is a joyous state of soul far removed from all ulterior motive. Honesty is unmeddling thought, sincere character, frank and unpremeditated speech. Innocent is he whose soul in its natural purity as it was created. Innocent is he whose soul is in its natural purity as it was created, and who makes intercession for all. Guile is a perversion of honesty, a deluded way of thinking, a lying disposition, false oaths, ambiguous words, a dark secrecy of heart, an abyss of cunning, deceit that has become habit, conceit turned into nature, a foe to humility, a pretense of repentance, an estrangement from mourning, hostility to confession, a teacher of willfulness, a cause of falls, a hindrance to resurrection, a smiling at offenses, affected frowning, sham reverence, diabolical life. An evil person is a namesake and companion of the devil. That is why the Lord taught us so to name the devil, saying, "Deliver us from the evil one." Let us run from the precipice of hypocrisy and from the pit of duplicity, hearing him who said, "Evildoers shall utterly perish, for like grass quickly shall they be withered, and like green herbs quickly shall they fall away. For such as these are food for demons." God is called love and also uprightness. That is why the wise man in the Song of Songs says to the pure heart, "Uprightness hath loved thee." Also the father of the wise man says, "Good and upright is the Lord, and of those who are his namesakes, he says that they are saved. He who saveth them who are upright of heart." And again, his countenance sees and visits those who are honest and just. The first property of the age of childhood is uniform simplicity, and as long as Adam had it, he did not see the nakedness of his soul, or the indecency of his flesh. Excellent, too, is that simplicity which is in some by nature, yes, and blessed, but not as much as that which is grafted into a guileful soul with toil and sweat. For the former is sheltered and protected from much complexity and passion, but the latter leads to the highest humility and meekness. The former has not much reward, but the latter surpassingly infinite. Let all of us who wish to attract the Lord to ourselves draw near to him as disciples to the Master, simply, without hypocrisy, without duplicity or guile, not out of idle curiosity. He himself is simple and not composite. He wants souls that come to him to be simple and guileless. For you will surely never see simplicity bereft of humility. The evil man is a false prophet who thinks that from words he can catch thoughts, and from outward appearance dispositions of the heart. I have seen honest souls who learnt to be evil from evil people, and I marveled how they could lose their natural disposition and superiority so soon. But it is as easy for the honest to fall from grace as it is difficult to change the dishonest. But true exile, obedience, and guarding of the lips have often had great power, and have wonderfully restored the incurable. If knowledge puffs up most people, simplicity and lack of learning can perhaps in the same measure humble them. All the same, here and there are people who pride themselves on their ignorance. The thrice blessed Paul the Simple was a clear example for us, for he was the rule and type of blessed simplicity. For no one, absolutely no one, has ever seen or heard or could see so much progress made in so short a time. A simple-hearted monk is like a rational and obedient dumb animal who lays his burden on his director. An animal does not answer back to his master who yokes him, nor does an upright soul who does do this with his superior, but follows wherever he is led. Though sent to the slaughter, he knows not to make protests. It is hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven, and equally hard for those who are foolishly wise to enter simplicity. A fall has often corrected the wily, giving them salvation and guilelessness in spite of themselves. Struggle to delude your own prudence, and by so doing you will find salvation and uprightness through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. He who has strength for this step, let him take courage, for he has become an imitator of Christ his Master and has been saved.
Okay. Questions, comments?
By guile, does it mean someone that's false, if they
Yeah.
are pretending and even succeed in convincing people?
They're deceptive. Putting on some kind of hypocritical show.
They're deceptive about virtue.
Right.
Is that okay?
Virtue signaling.
What's all virtue signal?
Guile.
In modern terms, when you say that, that sociopaths fall in that category, or
I don't know. You could make that kind of an equation. A sociopath is something else.
something else, right?
Yeah.
It's,
A sociopath is somebody who has no conscience.
right.
But y'all get the idea of simplicity.
Simplicity of mind.
Well, it's not simplicity in the sense of being dull or stupid, but it's simplicity in the sense of not being double-minded, not being not being one person one time and another person. In other words, not simplicity is to be the same person everywhere you are, or everywhere you go. So you're the same person at work, at church, at home, and it's not like you act differently in all these different contexts. It's a singleness of being, and yet also one in which there's no deception, and just real. And with that goes humility. Because humility is actually more, it's not about buying and scraping, humility is about brutal honesty. And being able to truly see oneself for who you are without deceiving others and trying to deceive others or trying to deceive yourself. You're not, in other words, you're not trying to project an image. You know. Here you are all dressed up, you know, you got the rasa, it's perfectly pressed, you got the hat, it's just right, it's just the right design, you know, and you know, your cologne is from the, you know, the best, and you got the nice French cuffs with the Byzantine eagles on the cufflinks. And, you know what I'm talking about? It's this particular species clergyman called the perfumed Archimandrite.
Yeah, the perfume.
But someone could dress like that and be humble and not,
Yeah, they can.
if they just want to be clean and presentable with.
It could be an outward farce.
Yeah, but very often it's not,
Yeah.
and that's the problem.
Because
You know, you can be, you know, present yourself all, you know, this great paragon of the church, and be completely morally corrupt. And that's guile and deceit and lie and hypocrisy and damnable, you know, ultimately.
right.
But you know, I mean, there's one of the ways you can tell the difference between a real monk and a Hieronon monk. In other words, a guy who's all dressed up, is that usually for the monk, he got his collar open. You know, you can usually tell what he had for dinner, what's on his cassock. He doesn't care. You know? It's not about appearances. You know, he doesn't have the manicured. You know, just as he just came from the mani-pedi shop. You know, probably got wild hair and a crazy beard.
But it's okay to be clean, though. Right?
It's okay to be clean.
Because I mean, like, not to condemn anyone, really not judging, but I knew someone, not religious, but his lack of hygiene and things, and rags, it was done to annoy people. I mean, you don't bathe for months at a time, and you live in a neighborhood or family, and it was done to aggravate people.
Yeah, and that's no good, because
it's
that's
just done to, you know.
It's pride.
I could go on. I mean, that also was like.
Have you ever come across a crust punk?
a what?
I don't know what
Crust
that
punk?
is.
A crust punk?
Yes.
What's a crust punk?
They're like, it's like a specific subculture of homeless hippies that pride themselves on their dirtiness, and that's really the best. That's the shortest way I can. It's the shortest way I can describe it. It's what that sounds like.
There's a
It's like the exact opposite of the clergyman that you were describing just now, except for like the common denominator is pride. It's like you have completely made yourself disgusting.
Yeah. Well, there's a story about when Father Pancrati, bishop, took over as abbot of Boulogne, and it was the brotherhood from the previous regime. The previous abbot had gotten himself kicked out. He created an international incident by throwing a Finnish bishop out of the altar. Of course, the Finnish bishop is a state official. And they were also the biggest benefactors of the monastery. But, you know, he was a new calendarist, and so godless without grace Protestant, right?
Oh my goodness.
So, anyway, so he got canned. When he had received the monastery from the state after it was given back, and his great achievement was that he had the abbot's quarters redecorated, and they were beautiful. You know, beautiful rosewood cabinets, beautiful furniture, everything, and he even had special wallpaper made with his initials on it.
Oh, I grabbed the wallpaper.
Embroidered.
So, and so it came to and then they got the monastery back. First they got the Pavorian in St. Petersburg, then they got the monastery back. And there were these 4 or 5 monks sitting at the trapeza, and they looked like little raccoons. You could see the whites around their eyes, but otherwise they were filthy. You know, and covered with ashes or soot, and just And Father Pancrati looked them up and down and said, you, and you, to the Banya immediately in the name of holy obedience, because they thought that they were being holy by being like the Athenites who only bathed once a year. So. Then there was Platina, where it was a really good thing that they had trapeza outside in the summertime because they had no running water, and so the monks would go in their cassocks and dive into a swimming hole, so they would have their yearly bath and wash their clothes too.
Do they put buckets out to capture rainwater?
No. They found now they've got some rainwater, some. But it was definitely the odor of sanctity.
Does
Stale
that make
sweat
someone
mixed with
holier?
incense. No,
Or-
it doesn't.
Yeah, it's,
So, not a good thing. Not a good thing. Is that a comment or question? Or?
No.
No?
Sorry.
So one of the things in monastic life that the abbot tries to do is to keep people from having these kind of idiosyncratic displays, which is what it is. You know, where you do things, something all by yourself, without a blessing, to make people think that you're holy or something like that.
yeah, that's.
And it doesn't work, because that has nothing to do with holiness. You know, so. And if it's some kind of idiosyncratic kind of thing like that, it's coming out of pride and vainglory. Look at me. Well, you don't even have to look, you can smell. All the way across the room. So, anything else?
Who was St. Paul the Simple?
Paul the Simple?
Paul the Simple, he mentions.
Paul the Simple was a companion of St. Anthony, actually. And he was a very simple monk, a very simple man. In other words, he wasn't too bright, but he was also guileless. And his guilelessness was manifest in humility and in simplicity. You know, and actually, in monasteries, people who are guileless sometimes end up being the butt of jokes and things like that. Because those of us who are not guileless, but rather infected with the contagion of pride, vainglory, judgment, and loving to joke, will torment them mercilessly. But in reality, it's there are very few people who have that kind of simplicity. It's a very childlike quality. There was one kid at a novice at, when I was still in Manton, and every time he would come to confession, I was embarrassed because he was so pure and so simple and so humble, and it just showed me for what I was. So, what an incredibly valuable thing. So, and few and far between are those people. So, let's see. It's been an hour, and the next step is it's fairly long. You want to do the next step, or shall we?
I have to wake up early. Every week I just don't sleep a lot of nights.
Okay. So does that mean you want to do the next step, or don't want to do the next step?
Depends. Let me see. I don't really want to.
You don't want to?
No.
Okay. Okay, well, I've been, usually I'm trying to keep these, for the sake of the video, on the shorter side. Because there's a lot to digest. So next week, of course, is the Canon of St. Andrew, so we're not going to meet. But God willing, we'll meet on the other Tuesdays, if that's acceptable. And go through Lent. We're almost done with this.
Not next week, though?
Not next week. It's Canon of St. Andrew.
Is that on Tuesday?
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
Oh, that's right.
The first week of Lent. So, I think you'll find listening to the canon. I think you'll find a lot of things that echo back and forth with this text. St. Andrew of Crete was also an ascetic writer, and of course he specifically uses it as an uses the scriptures as an allegorical jumping off point. But a lot of what he illustrates are the passions, using the scriptures, and so it's something something very, very powerful. What else? So next week, of course, the monastic tradition is that you don't eat from Sunday night until after the pre-sanctified on Wednesday. At Valon, they served chicken soup, which meant it was a potato that was boiled in water, and for those who were too chicken to keep the fast. So each according to their strength, but it's a really valuable thing to make a real effort during the first part of the fast. And if you have the opportunity, and if you're working in the world, there's no way you can do a fast like that. But if you have the opportunity to just go to church and keep the fast, it's something you'll find you'll have tremendous clarity of mind as a result. First day is hard, second day is a little easier, the third day you really you clearly perceive the divine mystery, and which is the whole point. It's so it's a practice. It's not a rule. You don't have to keep the fast like that. But it's a valuable thing.
It's not eat at all?
Yeah. Water maybe. But if you're living and working the world, I mean, it's going to be really hard. If you're in a monastery where all you do is go from your cell to the church and back to your cell, then it's not a big deal. And for the most part in the monasteries, the trapeza is closed those days. Maybe there's some bread or something available, some fruit. Is everybody clear on the fast?
No. Can you go over it again, please?
Pardon me?
Can you go over it again, the fast?
Well, I mean, there's two aspects of fasting. There's the one that we focus on the most, especially in parishes, is abstaining from animal products. And that's basically going vegan, except for squid and shrimp and clams and things like that. What's that?
My Western sensibilities are offended because that to me is luxury seafood.
Yeah.
Those are vegetables.
I wouldn't feel like I was fasting.
Those are vegetables.
Those are vegetables. So far as the Greeks go, those are vegetables. Even crab and lobster. Yeah. So you don't have to have any if you don't want to.
Right. Okay.
But if you want to eat locusts and wild honey, you're welcome. But I don't think locusts were
So it's
kosher.
basically staying vegetable, no fish, no oil.
No fish, no oil,
That means dairy products.
no
too?
dairy products,
No butter. Or,
no butter, no
what
eggs.
about margarine?
There's a, and this, I think you can call it the Pharisee factor. And depends on how much of a Pharisee you're going to be. The rule says no oil, which simply means, which usually almost always means olive oil. Now, if you can tell me what a canola is, I don't know.
I know what it is, actually.
Well, it's a rapeseed, but
Yes.
I still don't know what that looks like. But none of they didn't use other kinds of oil except olive oil in the ancient world. And so, and in Greek cuisine, everything is swimming in olive oil. And so if you cut out the olive oil, and so and do what's called serophagia, which is dry eating, it makes a big difference. So you can extend that oil, the question of oil, you can take it literally and say that means no olive oil. Or you can take it more broadly, shall we say. That means no oil, which would also mean no canola oil, no corn oil, no peanut oil, no peanut butter, no, and where are you going to go? Where are you going to go with all of that? So basically, you do according to your strength. But the rule is no olive oil and no alcohol, no wine. Now, the Germans actually developed beers for Lent because it said no wine, but it didn't say no beer. So beer is flowing bread, so you could have beer, right? In the ancient German Typicon, right? So, and indeed there were people who in Germany who lived on nothing but beer.
I want to do that fast.
So.
And so what about so basically it's no fish, meat, wine, oil.
Yeah, so no nothing with a backbone.
And no salad dressings on your salads.
Well, if you cut out oil, yeah. So I mean the thing is do the best you can and do what you're able to sustain, and maybe on Wednesdays and Fridays be more strict.
Is sriracha an oil?
No. It's hot sauce.
It's hot sauce.
I don't think it has oil in it.
No, sriracha doesn't have.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
No.
I think I'll be okay.
Yeah.
When does it start?
Now the other part of fasting that we don't often talk about is abstention from food. And the ancient pattern, and it's referred to extensively, we've already seen it referred to multiple times, is that you don't eat until the 9th hour, which means 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So you skip breakfast and you skip lunch and you have an early dinner.
So Ramadan.
What's that?
Ramadan.
That's where the Muslims got it. And so so technically fast days. So for example, Saturday and Sunday is no fasting. That does not mean no abstention. Abstention from certain things, abstention from animal products and all, goes all through Lent. But the fasting is the 5 days of the week. And so on Saturday and Sunday, Saturdays and Sundays, you can also celebrate the liturgy, right? But you can't celebrate the liturgy Monday through Friday during Lent. And part of that is because it's celebratory and it's festal, and part of it is because you have a meal afterwards. And so that normally would break the pattern of fasting. In the ancient church, the pre-sanctified was done at Vespers time, which means in the evening. So people would fast all day. Pre-sanctified would be a little early, maybe 2 in the afternoon instead of at 4. And so the meal would be around 3 or 3:30, the 9th hour. Here again, it's if you can't fast that long, do what you need to do. But that doesn't mean having a big meal right before you come to pre-sanctified liturgy. If you need to have, the Athonite rule is you have 6 hours before you go to communion, 6 hours of fasting. So if you have an evening pre-sanctified, and you're going to have communion at, say it's at 7 o'clock, then you don't eat after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You fast until then. So, does it make sense?
So it begins on next Monday.
Right. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday are very strict. A clean Monday, it's called Clean Week. Clean Monday, Clean Tuesday, and so forth. Then later on in Lent, you'll see there's a little more variation. Some days are wine and oil days. But Annunciation is the only day during Lent that fish is permitted, technically. And that's fish with a backbone. Yeah.
What is the general kind of tradition with regard to children and when they're supposed to start fasting?
Little children are not required to fast.
Right.
Depends on the child.
My son's interested in perhaps trying to.
How old is he now?
7.
He's right on the edge of starting.
Okay.
A little bit. I wouldn't withhold. And if he wants to fast from meat, that might be okay. But he needs to have his milk and maybe eggs.
So when is it that it really starts to? It is expected of children at 13, 14?
I would say 10 or 12.
Oh, okay.
And so they really understand. And then but that would be the full fast, not just.
Maximus is fascinated with the 40 days in the desert of Christ.
Uh-huh.
He always wants to talk about that.
Yeah?
tries to think about how could he possibly logistically.
It's pretty hard to figure out. So then there's another component of it too, and we should really seriously consider taking the money that we save from the meals and giving it to the poor. Almsgiving is very important. If you listen to the gospel on Sunday, it was all about generosity to the poor and to those in need as the criterion of judgment. Breaking the rules of the fast is not a sin. Okay? It's not like you're going to go to hell if you have a speck of whey in some some cracker or something like that, and that you've blown the whole fast, so you might as well go eat a steak. If you judge your brother and if you criticize your brother and look at how they're fasting, and criticize them for that, then you might as well go eat a steak because your fasting is all hypocrisy. I'm quoting St. John Chrysostom. But the most basic rule is you never, ever look at what anybody else is doing. And they could be sitting there and having a hamburger, and you've got your lentils, and that's fine. You don't know what they have to deal with. You don't know their life. So it probably wouldn't be wise to do that. There was a story about the novices or the seminarians at Jordanville, who in those days would go to McDonald's and get milkshakes during Lent, and then and of course the milkshakes at McDonald's at that time didn't have a molecule of anything organic in them. There was no dairy, and so they would sit on the steps of the Catholicon and drink their milkshakes while the monks were going into church. So
should there be more prayer during Lent?
Yeah, we should definitely make more of an effort on prayer. Should definitely make an effort to get our to have our prayer rule really established and be absolutely faithful to it. Because if we do something for long enough, like 3 or 4 weeks, it's there, it's established, and it becomes habitual. And so the idea is every Lent to lay another brick in the foundation, and so that gradually we build a whole foundation, and it's solid. And so we won't continue, of course, the whole Lenten discipline after Lent, but if there's some habit, something that we can take from it, then that's really good and really valuable. So, yeah.
A foundation for what exactly?
A spiritual discipline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Being able to maintain it
right
all the time.
Right.
As opposed to just certain times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So it may be that the discipline, it may not be that you continue to not eat meat. It may be that that when you fast strictly, you fast strictly. It may be that on Wednesdays and Fridays you can put off eating until mid-afternoon. What do they call it? Intermittent fasting. It may be that you get your prayer rule solid. Maybe that you get into the habit of going to confession every week. And these are things that you can carry on with you and are really valuable things for your whole life. But we need to establish them as like as this kind of foundational spiritual discipline, so that we carry it with us, and not just forget, as if we're starting anew. Also, it's a valuable thing to have a book, a spiritual book. Now, since we've almost finished the Ladder of Divine Ascent, you need to read a different spiritual book for that. And so everybody should find something. And it doesn't have to be about Lent. It could be, one of the books of the modern elders. It could be about the Russian elders, the Optina elders. It could be the modern Greek elders like Elder Paisios and Elder Porphyrios and all of them.
What's your favorite, Vladika, of all those?
Oh, it's hard to say.
Hard to say?
It's hard to say.
Okay. There's not a top 3 or 4?
Well, it depends on what category.
The elders.
Oh, the elders? Of the modern elders, Elder Porphyrios, Elder Paisios, then Elder Emilianos. It's pretty wonderful. Elder Joseph, Elder Ephraim. And all of this stuff is easily available. Then for specifically monastic reading would be Elder Dorotheos of Gaza, the Arena by St. Ignatius Bryncheninov, various writings of St. Theophan the Recluse, of course the Ladder of Divine Ascent. Probably first, one of the greatest should be St. Isaac the Syrian, his homilies, and then volume 2.
What was the first one you said? I'm sorry.
Elder Dorotheos of Gaza. And then there's, and you've got a lot of them are collected in the Philokalia.
I have the first volume, but the second volume is so much more expensive.
Well,
it's like $50 or $60. It's like so.
Yeah.
It's weird. I don't know why. Why does it go up in price so much from the first volume to the second volume?
I don't know. I got.
At the end of the first one, you're less attached to your money.
That's a good thing.
I got those back in the 70s, so it was a long time ago.
You can also any library. You don't have to buy. You can actually,
right?
Even public libraries participate in interlibrary loan.
I'm guilty at this point.
So they can find the book and they'll order it from another library. They don't even have to have it in their system. And so we forget about that sometimes. But interlibrary loan, and they'll, it's.
I really encourage people to build up their own libraries, though.
Yeah, right. If someone can't afford it.
Yeah. So another modern book that's really, or a couple of books is Markides, A Mountain of Silence.
Markides, how do you spell that?
Markides. Mountain of Silence, and then there's a successor book to that. Then there's a really excellent book, especially if you've exposed yourself to Eastern religions. The Young Man, the Guru, and Elder Paisios. That's really excellent.
I have that. I've never read it.
The Young Man, the Guru, and Elder Paisios. It's well worth reading.
Somewhere. Check out there.
Now, I'll warn you that there are people who've had demonic experiences while reading that book.
That's downstairs in the. Well, it used to be down here in the for sale library downstairs.
Yeah, but it's really.
I think that's where I bought it.
It's really good. It's really valuable.
Why would they have demonic experiences?
Because because if they've opened themselves to that, it'll resonate.
And
If they've had that, if they've done that stuff in the past.
And what is the name of it?
The Young Man, the Guru, and Elder Paisios.
And it's a story of.
It's the story of a young guy who in Greece who is essentially apostate, and who had gotten involved in yoga and gotten involved in all sorts of Eastern religions and was going to gurus and to all of these kinds of things and he was very taken with all of that. He was studying, Hinduism and so he and then he meets he goes to the Holy Mountain with some buddies and because any atheist in Greece who's a Greek can go to the Holy Mountain without any problem. And so he's walking around, and he's having problems, of course, spiritual problems. And he encounters Elder Paisios, and the elder, takes a liking to him and really touches his life. And so he becomes a kind of a constant reference point for this kid as he continues to go ahead and explore Hinduism. And you'd think that if you had one of these great elders from Mount Athos who clearly loved him and who clearly cared about him, and not only loved him and cared about him, but who would pray him and heal him long distance, that he would have kind of thought, maybe I don't really need to go see all these gurus. But he went and saw all these gurus anyway, and including these people that thought they were some kind of avatar of some kind of deity and all of this stuff. And all of that, of course, is profoundly demonic. And so this kid got himself into some really hairy situations, spiritually speaking, with some of these people, and saw through their, he perceived how demonic this stuff was, and finally, ultimately, not to spoil the ending, but he does repent and go back to the elder. And the elder heals him, but he can't. But no matter how often the elder would heal him, he would still go back to the guru because he still wasn't sure that he. So anyway, it's slightly frustrating because I can't imagine anybody being that dense.
Some of the accounts in that book are intense.
They're very intense. And if people have been exposed to Hinduism, to witchcraft, and that kind of magic, New Age, all of that.
I feel like when I'm reading, I'm like, how can he talk about this so calmly? Because he's describing something that is just so harrowing, It's wow.
Yeah, the mind control and all of that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I'm only like a third maybe through it, and it's like, it's really good.
But it gives you quite a picture of Elder Paisios.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's some great Romanian elders. And you can read this stuff about Father George Calciu, but there's several. And Platina has published a bunch of that stuff, St. Herman's. Some great Serbian spiritual fathers. Our thoughts control our lives. All this stuff is really good spiritual reading.
I'm almost done with the mystical theology of the Orthodox Church. Like a few pages away. I think I'm just going to start reading it again.
That's good.
It's fantastic, like you said. It would be amazing book.
So, anything else? All right. It is truly to bless thee, Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim, who without corruption gave us birth to God the Word. True Theotokos, we magnify thee. The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love for mankind, always now and ever, and to ages of ages.
Amen.
God bless you. God bless your Lent.